let's dive right in. As a reminder, last year, the Biden administration announced a plan which would be administered through the Department of Education to forgive a significant amount of student loan debt to most borrowers. So this would forgive up to $10,000 of student loan debt for non-Pell Grant recipients and up to $20,000 of student loan debt for Pell Grant recipients, subject to a pretty high income threshold that would leave it open to the vast majority of student debt holders in the U.S. And this would have forgiven approximately $400 billion in student loans and would have benefited approximately 43 million Americans. And the United States Supreme Court was like, that's too much good for one place, so we're going to go ahead and destroy that. So the legal basis, or at least the claimed legal basis from the Biden administration for being able to forgive all of that debt was under the 2003 HEROES Act, which basically gave, the Department of Education the ability to adjust or, change the terms of student loans, among many other things. But it was essentially intended to be able to allow the Department of Education to change their policies in the face of an emergency. And this was in response to, 9/11 and the war in Afghanistan.
Yeah. It specifically gives the education secretary the ability to, quote, waive or modify student loan balances.
Mm-hmm.
Waive or modify.
Which, boy, that does sound like exactly what this is.
Yeah. Now, what Roberts basically argued in his opinion, he wrote the majority opinion, was that this was basically a case of the Biden administration overstepping the legislature and doing something without congressional authorization. Mm-hmm. Because according to the Constitution, Congress does have the power of the purse. Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about something as significant as student loan forgiveness, we're talking about something that should require a piece of legislation in order to authorize. So here's why that's bullshit. The HEROES Act, and this is true, is a fucking piece of legislation.
And this is true. That's fucking mind blown right now. I cannot believe that.
So you're saying that he bypassed Congress. Congress has the authorization to forgive student loans, and he bypassed Congress. But the problem is, first off, I don't even think he had to go through the HEROES Act. He could have gone through the Higher Education Act, which gives the federal government the authorization to give student loans in the first place, which means that the executive branch administers the student loans, which means that the money that's owed is owed to the executive branch, which means that you can forgive it.
Yeah.
Because if I were to, say Michael were to come up to me and ask me for $50, which is unlikely because he makes 10 times more money than me.
Not 10. That's too many more money.
Not 10, but a lot more money than me. He were to say, hey, Nathan, can I have $50? And I were to loan him $50. And then say a year later, Michael were to come up to me and say, oh, hey, I owe you $50. And he were to take out $50 and hand it to me. I would be allowed to say, you know what? You keep it. All right. I'm forgiving that. I'm forgiving that loan. I'm forgiving that, the money that you borrowed, you don't owe me anything. I'm allowed to do that. So is the federal government. But Biden didn't even go through the Higher Education Act, which he could have. Instead, he went through the HEROES Act, which was a little bit more specific in that he tied it to the pandemic.
Yes.
Now,
it was specifically the HEROES Act authorized these kind of additional powers in the face of an emergency. So it is more constrictive.
And you can't argue, nobody can argue that the pandemic did not count as an emergency that warranted some level of student loan forgiveness, because it's something that Trump did several times.
Yeah.
And nobody tried to challenge it.
Yeah, it's a student loan. It was clearly a national emergency that had some of the largest emergency spending ever. And to your point, under the HEROES Act, Betsy DeVos, as part of the Trump administration, multiple times, delayed student loan repayment. So like specifically as an emergency measure, the Secretary of Education during an emergency modified the terms of loan repayment. So
the reason we're making that point is because the question here is not whether or not the COVID pandemic warrants a disaster as defined by the HEROES Act, because we've already established that it does. A Democratic administration and a Republican administration have both characterized it as being that, and that was never challenged by the Supreme Court. The question at hand is whether or not the extent is allowed by law.
Yeah.
I feel like the best source of information here would probably be, I don't know, maybe the person who wrote it.
What a novel source.
So one of the architects of the HEROES Act, former Democratic Representative George Miller, he actually wrote a brief to the Supreme Court explaining why, under his law, it was legal.
Yeah.
He said, quote, "That language could hardly be clearer. Statutory or regulatory provisions regarding federal student loan programs include the rules or regulations that would ordinarily require borrowers to pay their loan balances. By giving officials the authority to waive those requirements in connection with a national emergency, Congress empowered officials to say that those requirements no longer apply, that borrowers no longer need to pay off the debt they owed." Congress.
Yeah.
Congress. Again, the question at hand here that the court's trying to argue is that Joe Biden bypassed Congress in order to just put in a policy that he agreed with. But he used congressional legislation that was clearly worded that the architect of that legislation even concurred that, yes, this is what it is fucking supposed to do.
Yeah.
The language could not be clearer. He said, it's not ambiguous. He said, that language could hardly be clearer.
Yeah.
He said that.
It's so true. Like, it is yet another case, like we talked about last week, of the Supreme Court creating rationale to attempt to support a position that they've already reached. They already decided ahead of time that they needed to find some way to block Biden's student loan forgiveness plan. Again, it says waive or modify the laws and regulations governing student loan programs. And then in Robert's opinion, he recognizes that the word modify means that the Biden administration can make adjustments to existing provisions. Now, he qualifies them as modest adjustments, even though that's not in the legislation.
That's not in the law.
Qualify the
That's
amount.
Not in the fucking law.
He just fucking makes it up.
You fucking made that up.
He just fucking makes it up. Yeah. And so that means that, that they're not allowed to transform them, and that the student debt relief program would, quote, create a novel and fundamentally different loan forgiveness program. Again, that sounds like a modification. Also, it says waive. Modification is not doing the work here. And in response to that, Roberts basically made the point that the Secretary of Education can waive certain loan requirements, like the procedures for loan forbearance or something like that, but can't waive the loans themselves.
You made that up. That's not what the law says.
Exactly. He's just fucking making that shit up. Even that, okay, let's modify it to say that loans have to be repaid for 1 day after they become due, and after that point, all remaining loan balance is forgiven. Currently, if you don't pay within 12 years, all remaining loan balance is forgiven. So the idea that you couldn't reduce that to 1 day is crazy. That would clearly be just an adjustment of extent, not of the kind of the law. And that's even accepting Robert's point, right? That's even accepting his absolutely bullshit logic and limitations that he's totally just reading into a law that he disagrees with.
Yeah.
It's
look, if the issue is the only way that they could have possibly ruled against Biden's student loan forgiveness program would be if they declared that the HEROES Act was unconstitutional.
Yes.
All right. They claimed that what Biden did was unconstitutional because he bypassed Congress, meaning he was bypassing the whole power of the purse thing. However, he did it through a law.
Yeah.
So the only way that Roberts could have declared the act to be unconstitutional is to declare the law to be unconstitutional, which he did not do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really important to touch on one concept that is really doing all of the work. So once you go through his opinion and cut out all the bullshit about made up provisions of the law, ultimately it rests on this made up doctrine that Roberts and Thomas and the conservative wing of the court in general have been, well, really just making up out of whole cloth over the last couple of terms. And that is the major questions doctrine. And this is an invention of this court specifically designed to attempt to dismantle administrative agencies. So as we've talked about in the past, administrative agencies, as Nathan just described, are agencies that exist endowed by Congress in a piece of legislation. These agencies are created and they can then, go through rulemaking procedures in order to be able to have that kind of delegated authority from Congress to govern a specific area of law. And this is important, right? Like if Congress were to write a law that said that like outlaws, assault rifles, for example, it would be pretty fucking easy for a gun manufacturer to adjust the specifics of what is defined in that law as an assault rifle, just to barely not meet that criteria, where the function of the firearm would be the same. And so they'd be able to, with the letter of the law, just totally work around Congress's authority. And as a result, Congress would have to pass a whole fucking new law every single time a tiny little thing in the world changed. But by endowing agencies with the ability to make rules, they're able to make laws like flexible and reactive and have ongoing guidance. And this is like a really critical part of governing. It's also a part of governing that the conservative wing of the court is directly taking aim at and has been for the last few years. And the way they're doing this is with the major questions doctrine. And essentially what this is a made up test or heuristic that allows them to say, hey, if an administrative agency's power has has important economic implications or is of significant political interest, right, or might be politically charged, then the power delegated to that agency or the legislation that created that agency or gives them that power must very clearly state it. Basically what they're doing is taking the legs out of the administrative agency's ability to write rules and make laws that actually govern stuff. So in this case, just out of nowhere, they just decide that $400 billion is too much money, essentially, for the administrative agency to have control over without an explicit grant from Congress. Now, as we've already mentioned, they have it. They have that explicit grant of power from Congress. But this is just the ability for the court. Well, let me just put it in Elena Kagan's terms. So Elena Kagan, in her dissent, explained that Congress, quote, delegates to agencies often and broadly, and for a variety of reasons, ranging from the expertise of those agencies to their ability to keep up with the changing times and circumstances and the limits on Congress's own ability to address everything that needs to be done. The Supreme Court's reliance on the major questions doctrine overrules Congress's decisions about how and when to delegate. And that is a major problem, not just for governance, but for democracy too. And she went on to say that this makes the Supreme Court, quote, the arbiter, indeed the maker of national policy.
Yeah. So as garbage as the opinion that was written by John Roberts is, as fucking baseless as it is, to make matters worse, this fucking court case should never have been heard in the
Let's
first
talk
place.
about standing, baby.
Because, when it comes to lawsuits, in order for the lawsuit to actually happen, there has to be some level of standing, which means that some type of damages have to be proven. So initially, Republicans were, grasping at straws to try to figure out, okay, how can we find somebody who has standing? Because who does this hurt? Because, I mean, it doesn't really hurt anybody. So it was really hard for them to find any standing. First off, they tried to do 2 lawsuits, which was represented by 2 individuals who did not qualify for the Biden forgiveness program, which even this Supreme Court was just like, you're not going to be benefited from us striking it down. Like, there's literally fucking nothing. You have nothing.
Yeah.
But then there was another lawsuit that was brought by Missouri and 5 other conservative states. And Kagan pointed to the fact that none of these states would suffer any injury from the Biden student loan forgiveness program because it's the federal government that administers the loans, not the states. So they had no damages, but what they tried to argue was that there's this public agency in Missouri called the Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority, but which they would be hurt by it. They would incur some costs. Now, it turns out, because of all of the administrative work they would do in carrying out the forgiveness, they would actually net more money under the law, which is like the extent of which they would be affected by it. But even if that weren't the case, the agency did not consent to being a part of the lawsuit in the first place.
Yeah, the proper party withstanding would be the agency, not the state that the agency's in.
Yeah. And instead of just rejecting the court case because it had no fucking standing, they decided to hear it under the major questions doctrine.
Yep. Because they're like, ooh, sweet, major questions means that we can just do whatever the fuck we want.
Yeah.
It's like, especially on questions of standing. How does something like a major questions doctrine create a harm that the Supreme Court has the power to address?
Yeah.
It doesn't. It can't. All that means is that anytime someone brings a lawsuit that happens to get appealed up to the Supreme Court, they get to say, oh, it doesn't actually matter what the procedure is, what the harm is, whether there's literally anyone in this case who has been harmed. They just get to say, oh, this asks a question that we want to answer. And therefore, we just get to write laws about it. It is literally exactly the function of a legislature with different clothes, different dressings. So there's just 9 of them instead of 535.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I think it's easy for someone to listen to this and think, well, you all just want student loan forgiveness to be enacted. Therefore, you would disagree with the court case no matter what the standing was. And you know what? I don't know. Maybe that's the case. But this is stupid fucking standing.
That's the thing.
Yeah. That's the thing. Even
you know what? Bring that case. Bring a case with good standing, and we can test our intellectual integrity then.
Yeah. But this does not test our intellectual integrity at all. It is a garbage decision with horrible justification that just makes shit up about a law that was written by a guy who says, yes, this is the type of thing that I wrote the law for.
It's so funny.
He says the language could not be clearer.
It's so funny because the Supreme Court is used to making making up shit about the founding fathers in order to support their originalist jurisprudence that is also totally made up. And they really get caught in it when the people that wrote the laws that they're talking about are still fucking alive. And they're like, no, actually, you guys were actually wrong about that. I can actually say it because I'm here. And they're like, if only we could intuit what they knew at the time.
It's like, actually, I'm still alive. Hello?
Yo, what is that sound?
Dead.
Is that a ghost? Oh, I feel the legislature's talking to me. Okay, so now it's back on Biden. Let's talk about what's going on there. Because ultimately, we still expect Biden to follow through on his campaign promises to relieve student loan debt burdens. So following this decision, they came out with what is essentially an updated repayment plan. So currently, there are provisions already that help alleviate some payment burden for student loan borrowers. So the current plan is the revised pay-as-you-earn repayment plan. And under that plan, there's a bunch of details, but the main provision is that you are only required to pay a maximum of 10% of your discretionary income, monthly income, towards an undergraduate student, like student loans. And so the new plan, the main thing it would do is reduce that 10% down to a 5% cap. So 5% of your discretionary income is the cap of your monthly repayment. It would also, take everyone that's on that previous plan and put them on the new plan with the lower threshold. And it would essentially cap, set there are people that can pay $0 under the plan. And basically, if your income is at or below $15 an hour of full-time work as an individual taxpayer, your repayment would be set to zero, essentially. So there is some some relief for like people that are at the really low end of the income spectrum.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's just a little bit of repayment relief for, lowest income borrowers. So not nearly the broad forgiveness that was his commitment.
This better fucking just be an in the meantime thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I hope that Biden is smart enough to realize that there are a lot of people that when that Supreme Court decision came out, they almost just fucking gave up.
Yeah.
On politics.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are so many people that constantly, all the fucking time, see how corrupt and elitist our government is. The fact that we've passed tax breaks for rich people. We passed the Trump tax cuts where 80% of all benefits are going to go to the top 1% after 10 years. Fucking tax breaks for people who own yachts. Like
the yachts for tots
bailing
program,
out,
yeah.
Bailing out Wall Street, the same executives that crashed our economy and caused the 2008 recession and the subprime mortgage crisis, fucking bailing them out. And you know what? You know what? The day that this Supreme Court case came through, I wasn't even angry. I mean, I was angry, but I was just depressed for the rest of the day. I was just like, good things aren't possible.
Mm-hmm.
Good things are never possible. What's the point? And Biden, you really don't want your base to feel that way.
Yeah.
Democrats really don't want their base to feel that way, because if we feel that way, we are not going to show up to vote.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And look, this is me, somebody who I actually do try to be hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I am constantly fighting against nihilism from my peers.
Yeah.
Where they come to me and they're like, hey, Nathan, what is the point? Tell me something hopeful. Like, I know that like you follow this stuff. I know that you know what's going on. Give me something. And that day, even I was just kind of like, it's all meaningless. Mm-hmm. It's all, we're all just fucked no matter what we do. Now, look, I know I've probably gone through this before, but I'm just going to go through it again. All right. This plan would have meant so much for my family. I am a cancer survivor, and so is my wife. I just recently finished paying off medical debt from a CT scan from a year ago. And and luckily it was that particular scan was enough to meet my out of pocket. So every 3 months that I have to go to and get CT scans to make sure the cancer hasn't come back, I didn't have to pay for the rest of those because, the initial one was so goddamn expensive.
Sure.
My wife is a cancer survivor. And because of our medical situation, we can't have kids in the traditional way, which means we had to go through IVF treatments. I've talked about on this pod about how my wife is pregnant right now. We had to go through IVF treatments, which is fucking expensive. Mm-hmm. We had to save money. We had to beg relatives for additional money. In fact, the cost of IVF is about $20,000, which is how much we would have been saved by the student loan forgiveness plan. Now, I don't have any student loan debt because my parents were wealthy enough to be able to afford to cover the cost of my undergraduate degree. But my wife, she wasn't able to. She had to get student loans in order to get her degree. She had to get student loans to get her degree in social work, which, by the way, a degree in which she will be dedicating her life to helping the very people that are constantly fucked by the very system that wouldn't even give us this modest fucking degree of relief. And what would have meant so much to my family that has had to deal with so much in the last year is that it was looking like around the time that we would have our kid, we would have this massive financial relief. Instead, what's going to happen is pretty much right as we're having the kid, student loan payments are going to kick in, which means that we're going to be, as little money as that we're already going to have left over because we're going to have to pay a lot more to take care of a kid because it's fucking expensive to raise a kid. We're going to have to pay even more because Republicans wanted to fuck over people like me in order to spite the Democrats. Now, they'll have you believe that, this is a case of the Democrats trying to take money from poor people without a college degree and give them to rich people with college degrees. First off, that's bullshit because this didn't even apply for people that make under, $125,000?
Yeah, for a single person, yeah.
Doesn't even apply to people that make over that amount. The people that would receive the most benefits from this are the people that are either of a moderate income or a lower income. Those are the people that would benefit from this. Nobody was hurt by it. Those are the people that would benefit from this.
Yeah.
The reason why they try to use that framing is because they want to turn us against each other. Elites want to turn the people that are middle class or lower class, they want to turn us against each other. And they want to make us nihilistic. And we can't let them do that. As tempting as it is, we cannot let them do that. We need to keep pushing the Democrats to actually fucking do something, to actually fight. We need to make it so that Biden has to exhaust every single avenue to get us student loan forgiveness. And we need to make it clear to him that if he doesn't do that, he won't be able to depend on us. They need us more than we need them. And we need to remind them of that. That's why I'm still hopeful. Because that is the truth. They need us more than we need them. And if enough voices scream loud enough, they cannot be drowned out by all the money in the world.